For home team talk, Sports 1280, New Orleans.
Good show as always. If you missed any of it, sports1280.com, NOLA.com, iTunes, SoundCloud, and YouTube page. And, of course, check back later. Clyde always does a great job chopping and slicing and dicing all the fun topics that we talk about at NOLA.com. And I'm telling you, people go check it out. And it's video, written words explaining things.
Written words.
Podcast. It's like any form you want. Clyde throws it all on a post.
Try to give people what they want, man.
Verbs, adjectives, some nouns in there.
Adjectives, at least. Lots of adjectives.
Maybe like a conjunction or two.
One or two. And some prepositions.
Maybe two.
That Nicholls State education.
Hey, man. Got to get it from somewhere.
Exactly.
The champions of the
Southland Conference
champs.
There we go. All right, that's you got another mention in hour number 2, so we can move on now. But let's head back to what the caller was saying, asking about before we went to break, the restricted free agency specifically with Willie Sneed and Brandon Coleman, and the argument I laid out, not necessarily an argument, but a debate that the Saints could be having. And Jeff, I know you've been on board saying, look, it doesn't cost you that much. Go ahead and tender them, and the bottom tender would be $1.9 million per player for 1 year. So it's a 1-year deal. But my thought is, if the Saints, and specifically with Willie Sneed, if the Saints did not want to use Willie Sneed last year, they just didn't want to do it, why would you keep him and pay him triple? Why wouldn't you go out and go get someone else? I just don't. For me, if I'm the Saints, look, I still think Willie Sneed's a capable player. I don't know what the hell happened last year. I think the Saints frowned upon him, suspension, hamstring injury, whatever, add it all up, and I think they just frowned upon him and phased him out.
They're ready to move on, is what you're thinking.
And I think if you're going to do that, why would you spend the money? I would spend the money on a guy who you think would come in. Now, Brandon Coleman, do I think he's $1.9 million per a year worthy? No, I don't think that either. And then on the other side, if you're Coleman and Sneed, if the Saints say, look, we don't want to tender you, but we'll give you a cheaper deal. If I'm Willie Sneed, I'm getting the hell out of Dodge. After what happened last year, no, I'd want to go somewhere else. And maybe Brandon Coleman would stay, but you would think he would want to test the market as well. So I think it's a difficult balancing act here.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I go along with Josh Katzenstein's theory, and that is you got good players in the building, you keep them, you don't let them get away. These are guys that I think they've invested a lot of time in developing, especially Brandon Coleman. He's gotten better every year. Now, he's not a starting caliber receiver, I don't think, but he's a useful player for them, made some big plays for them this year. So it just depends on what their plan is, what the Saints' plan is at wide receiver going forward. Are they going to go out and make a run at Jarvis Landry or trade for Jarvis? That's going to affect the rest of the depth chart. Then you're probably right, Larry. I mean, at some point, Mickey Loomis and Jeff Ireland and Sean Payton are looking at a board, a position group board in their meeting rooms, and there's so much money, so much of your cap devoted to the wide receiver position, and you can't start piling up too much money at wide receiver, otherwise you're not going to have money for the other positions. So if they go out and go bold and try and get somebody like Jarvis Landry, then they're probably not going to tender these two guys. And one thing I don't know, this is how far removed I am from my NFL beat work, are those contracts guaranteed? I assume they are. Okay, when you tender a guy at $1.9 million,
that's your base. So if you signed him and then you cut him,
well, then what's wrong with that? If you don't want him around, I mean, then you've got him under.
But you don't have the money to spend right now if you want to use it in free agency.
Well, that's okay. They can always. They've shown they can create money.
Well,
they've shown they could in the past.
If you've got $4 million in your back pocket, you don't have to create.
But I do think one thing that is a little bit misinterpreted by fans out there is, the Saints, I think, go into this with around 30-something million. That's not a lot of room. Everybody is like, oh, they've got room now because they've been so cash-strapped. It's not particularly a ton of room. It's better than they've been in the past, but it's not. Once you start adding up and start signing people, and once they sign Breeze, that 30 is going to be eaten up pretty quickly.
Well, the Breeze is the big
it's the biggest thing they're going to have on their roster.
Right, absolutely.
Now but that's why I think, and we've had Mike Triplett on the show before, and he keeps saying over and over that he thinks they're only going to sign a one-year deal. And the one thing that I disagree with him on that is I don't know how they can do it cap-wise. I mean, to me, that's the worst thing they can do. It's all going to be in 1 year cap-wise, so I don't know how they could – I suspect they're going to do like a 3-year deal just to make it cap-friendly.
Well, you could call it a 3-year deal, and then you have kind of those ghost years afterwards. You could do it that way. But they've already done that, and they've already got $6 million tied to them this year, $6 million tied to them next year, and another $6 million. You've got $18 million still tied to him.
That's what I'm saying.
And so you can't keep kicking the can down the road, even though they've done that historically and gotten themselves in trouble. But you say that they don't have a ton of cap space. I think people look at it as, look, they'll go sign guys and bring in a bunch of guys if they want to, give them cheap cap numbers this year and move forward. And they at least – they've tried to do that in the past, and when they've had to fight to get back under the cap, when they're, say, like $20 million over and you're having to roster chop guys like Roman Harper and Will Smith and John Vilma they didn't re-sign and Jabari Greer, that offseason was insane. That was leading into the 2014 year? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just saying they're below the league average. I mean, the league average is $37 million available right now. They're at $33.5. So who they're competing against in the open market, some other teams have more money than they do. So I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, but you still got room. They could still manage, and the Saints roster is far more attractive now. So you could get a guy and say, all right, we'll give you a cheap cap number, and then you could still sign if you want to sign a couple of guys to some deals, you can do that even after the Breeze deal
no doubt
gets done. But as far as Kenny Vaccaro, look, as we've been talking about for, I don't know, a year, I'd say, at least longer, that we had question marks that Kenny Vaccaro would be coming back, and we've inferred it basically with informed opinions, I'll just put it to you that way, that Kenny Vaccaro would not be back with the Saints, and Kenny basically confirmed that with our own Josh Katzenstein. He had a chance to catch up with him yesterday, wrote a story, and Kenny Vaccaro is essentially resigned to the fact that he will be hitting the open market. And I've written about it, and we've talked about it. I think Kenny owes it to himself to do that because I don't think the Saints are going to maximize any contract. And the Saints, I think a little bit, they've probably soured on him a little bit. We've seen he's given them enough reasons to sour on him. And if Kenny Vaccaro wants to be top market value, I think the Saints are ready to move on, and Kenny seems resigned to that. Here's a quote, in the lead quote in Josh's story. You can go check that out at NOLA.com, saying, quote, "It kind of frustrated me a little at first, but I understand it is what it is." So he says, I love the Saints. Obviously, if it was my choice, you would want to stay with the team you played with your whole career. And so he's assuming he'll be gone.
Yeah, and he's missed 9 games the last 2 years, but for the most part, he's been a pretty durable, available commodity. I mean, 68 games he's played in, he started 67 of them, was pretty much a full-time starter from the get-go, right out of the University of Texas. And, Kenny Vaccaro has strengths, and he will be attractive to some teams on the open market. He's versatile. He's a very good tackler. Excellent in the box, could be a good blitzer. There's a lot of things you can do with Kenny Vaccaro. He's just not particularly valuable to the Saints right now because they've got Von Bell and Marcus Williams. So he's the third safety, and they showed when Kenny Vaccaro went out last year that they could survive just fine without him. So I think that's what the decision is being made internally.
Guys, I think, and I'd like to hear both your thoughts on it going towards, the back end of the segment, but a lot of things I've seen specifically before we even got this topic was I think that the fans specifically are wondered about the payback, specifically in that, okay, let's say that both Kenny Vaccaro and the Saints are resigned to him not coming back, and he's free to test the open market. What if he goes to a team what if he goes to the Panthers? What if he goes to the Falcons? Or what if he goes to another type of common opponent that the Saints will probably see, and then he starts to kind of ball out? What is specifically...
like Malcolm Jenkins?
Yeah, right?
That's the fear. I've already seen those tweets,
right?
Yes.
And that's the thing that I guess,
that's part of the
some
league,
of the fans would just because they were like, okay, well, he maybe has some great tendencies, but if he goes somewhere else and completely explodes, then we're looking at, man, we let another one go. So just a little bit of those lines of what the fans are kind of teetering on the edge of dealing with. Yeah, we probably don't need him because we have young talent, but man, like, you really just don't want him to come back and just have that game against you.
It's always a risk. And look, Ted Ginn Jr. had a monster game against the Panthers this year in the Superdome, came back to haunt the Panthers, but that's part of the league. It goes on all the time. And I think what can't be lost in this Kenny Vaccaro situation is that Dennis Allen was not involved when they drafted Kenny Vaccaro. That was Rob Ryan's defense, and that happens a lot as well. I brought up Akeem Hicks a bunch of times on this show. Akeem Hicks is a very good player, but for whatever reason, the defensive coordinators changed here, the scheme changed, and he wasn't as good a fit here as he was when they drafted him. So just because he goes somewhere else and is more productive doesn't necessarily mean that the team was wrong for letting him go. Doesn't necessarily mean I personally think they should have kept him, but I understand why they didn't. They changed schemes. He's a better fit somewhere else. That happens all the time. And Kenny Vaccaro might get into a defensive scheme that can utilize his talents better than what the Saints have been able to do. That certainly was the case with Malcolm Jenkins. Malcolm Jenkins was a good player. He's always a good player. He wasn't being utilized properly here. And he also went through, I think, 3 different coordinators in his last 3 years. And that doesn't help matters.
No, he went from Greg Williams to Steve Spagnuolo to Rob Ryan.
Yes.
In 1, 2, 3 years, absolutely. But don't discount that the Saints could easily add another veteran safety. Look, Kurt Coleman just went on the market with Carolina.
Yes.
From just asking Sean Payton about defenses and such, he always seemed to have a bit of a respect for Kurt Coleman. And that was a bit of a surprise in Carolina, according to Joe Person, our buddy from the Charlotte Observer. He said when they cut Charles Johnson, that was a given. When they cut Jonathan Stewart, that was a given. But Kurt Coleman was a little bit of a surprise, and Carolina basically stating that maybe they don't think he's that good of a player. But if you're going to go get a Kurt Coleman, maybe you don't break the bank. You don't assume he's a starter, or you play 3 safeties. So just because Kenny leaves doesn't mean they might not address the position. And Raphael Bush is a free agent too. Do they re-sign him? I could see that too. So they've got some work to do behind your young guys. So even though Kenny leaves, someone's going to come in. It might not just be in the same starting role. And like I said, if you get a nickel corner, a slot corner, maybe your defense changes a little bit. So that's the name of the game right now. We're talking about all these players, and that's what the Saints are thinking right now as far as up in Indianapolis as well.
Wasn't Kurt Coleman, refresh my memory because I'm old and decrepit, you young guys here.
I didn't even have to say it.
Well, I know, I'm just taking on that because it's become a narrative. But wasn't Kurt Coleman one of the guys when they played the Panthers this year, the Saints that is, wasn't he like caught in a big play downfield and my memory is of him either getting burned or getting fooled or trying to save the day on a big play. Am I wrong? Or?
I don't think you're wrong. I don't know exactly the specifics, but I think I do remember that. That may be one of the reasons why Carolina's like, I think we're good. I think we're going to move on. So, but yeah.
I can't remember what play. Did they do like a end around or something? Can't remember what it was. I just remember Kurt Coleman frantically trying to save the day on a big play. Maybe one of our callers or listeners can refresh my memory, but I remember distinctly being in the dome and writing down Kurt Coleman's name.
He might not be the solution, but he's on the market, so we just brought him up, and the Saints are familiar with him, so you never know. So, all right, let's take a break right here, final break on the show, and when we get back, I can't believe it took us this long for, Jeff, not to tout another Louisvillian who, by someone in the NFL Network's world, has a Louisvillian touted to the Saints in his first round of his mock draft. Lamar Jackson to the Saints? Really?
The internet couldn't handle that.
We'll talk about that coming up next. Final segment here, Sports 1280, NOLA.com, the iHeartRadio app. Dunc Holder.